It was a cold autumn evening in the small, sleepy town of Maplewood, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep. The streets were quiet, the air crisp, and life seemed to move at a comfortable, predictable pace. But that night, something broke that rhythm. At 53, Sarah Walters had built a life for herself here. She was known for her quiet nature, her small garden that was the pride of her neighborhood, and her warm smile whenever she greeted a passerby. No one expected the phone call she received that evening to change everything. It was a stranger on the other end of the line, a simple request for directions, or so it seemed. But what came next, what Sarah didn't know, would lead to her brutal end. A stranger's lie, and a chilling betrayal, would unravel a chain of events no one in Maplewood could have ever predicted. What happened that night in Sarah's home? What was the real story behind her murder? And why did it take so long for the truth to surface? The answers to those questions may shock you. And as we piece together the pieces of Sarah Walters' tragic death, we'll uncover just how little we truly know about the people around us, and the darkness that can hide behind the most ordinary of faces. Wait, before you see this insane story, drop a comment right now, and tell me where you're watching from. And if this video shocks you, trust me, it will. Smash that subscribe button and hit the bell, because we drop even crazier videos every week, and you don't want to miss them. The small town of Maplewood had always been a peaceful one. It was the kind of place where neighbors chatted over backyard fences, where children played until the streetlights came on, and where most people could recall the names and faces of everyone they passed on the sidewalk. In Maplewood, life moved slowly, and it was easy to believe that nothing ever truly changed. But on October 12, 2015, everything would change for 53-year-old Sarah Walters, a beloved figure in her community. Sarah had lived in Maplewood for nearly 20 years. She was a woman known for her warm smile, her passion for gardening, and her deep sense of kindness that made her a familiar face to everyone. She worked as a bookkeeper at a local accounting firm, a job that allowed her to stay involved in the community but kept her mostly out of the limelight. In the evenings, Sarah could often be found tending to her garden, her hands buried in the soil as she carefully pruned her flowers, or chatting with neighbors who stopped by. Her life, although unassuming, was one built on simplicity and routine. Sarah was also a widow. Her husband had passed away 5 years earlier, and her children were grown and living in different cities. Still, she remained close to her family, often visiting them or hosting them during the holidays. On that particular evening, October 12th, the day had started just like any other. Sarah finished her day at work, picked up a few groceries from the local store, and drove home, where she was looking forward to a quiet evening in. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched beneath her car as she pulled into her driveway just after 6 p.m. The sun was setting, painting the sky with a soft golden hue. Sarah's home, nestled at the edge of town, was a modest 2-story house with a white picket fence and an array of colorful flowers lining the front yard. She parked her car, grabbed the grocery bags, and walked toward the door, unaware of the events that were about to unfold. In the stillness of that evening, a phone call would come that would forever alter Sarah's life, and ultimately lead to her tragic death. The call came from a stranger. At first, the voice on the other end of the line seemed harmless. A man in his early 30s, with a calm tone. He claimed he was lost and needed directions to a nearby street. His voice was smooth, but there was something about it that made Sarah feel uneasy. She couldn't quite place it. After all, she was a woman who had lived alone for years and had encountered her share of odd phone calls, but never one quite like this. The man on the phone asked if she could help him find his way, and Sarah, being the kind-hearted woman she was, agreed. She gave him directions to a street not far from her own. There was no immediate threat, no direct sign that this was anything more than a typical, if slightly strange, interaction. But the man insisted on something more. He wanted to meet her in person, to thank her for her help. He was, he said, just around the corner. Unsettled but still polite. Sarah hesitated. For a moment. It was getting late, and she had no reason to invite a stranger over. But he was persistent, telling her that he would be in her neighborhood soon. He promised he wasn't dangerous. He even told her he was from out of town, just passing through. She agreed to meet him briefly, unsure why she felt compelled to do so. Maybe it was out of politeness, maybe out of a need for human connection. It was a decision that would cost her everything. As Sarah stood outside her front door, she couldn't see the stranger approaching. The darkness of the evening had begun to settle in. The sound of her footsteps on the front porch mixed with the distant hum of streetlights flickering on. She waited for a few minutes, her thoughts wandering back to her quiet life. But then, the figure of a man appeared in the distance. The man, in his early 30s, was tall, with a scruffy beard and a hoodie pulled low over his head. He looked harmless enough, just an ordinary person. But there was an odd energy about him, something she couldn't explain. When he reached the porch, he greeted her with a smile, his demeanor friendly but a little too eager. He introduced himself as Ben Miller, and while Sarah didn't have much time to consider this odd meeting, she offered him a brief smile and a handshake. At first, everything seemed normal. They exchanged pleasantries. He thanked her for the directions, and then, without any warning, everything changed. Ben Miller lunged at Sarah, knocking her to the ground. The phone call, the innocent meeting, none of it had been as it seemed. This man, this stranger, wasn't lost. He wasn't even who he said he was. And before Sarah could scream, before she could fight back, he was already on top of her, his grip tightening, his intentions clear. But how did things go from an innocent request for directions to a cold-blooded attack? In the weeks that followed, the police would uncover chilling details about Ben Miller. His real name wasn't Ben Miller at all, but Tyler Harper, a man with a dark past. He had been in and out of trouble for years, and while he had a history of petty crime, no one had ever suspected him of anything like this. He was a stranger to Maplewood, a visitor who had come to town under false pretenses, and it wasn't until his arrest that anyone learned of his true identity. At first, the investigators believed this was a random act of violence, a brutal attack by a man who simply saw an opportunity. But as they dug deeper into Tyler Harper's past, a more unsettling picture began to emerge. Harper had a history of manipulative behavior, and his motivations were far from clear. He had been in town for less than 24 hours, and no one could understand why he had specifically targeted Sarah Walters. It all started with a phone call. Just a brief exchange of words between Sarah Walters and a stranger, a seemingly harmless interaction, one that would have been forgotten by most. But for Sarah, it was the first step into a nightmarish chain of events that would forever change the course of her life. The man on the other end of the line, Tyler Harper, was polite enough at first. He asked for directions, claiming he was lost and couldn't find his way to a street nearby. Sarah, being the kind-hearted woman she was, agreed to help. It was a simple request, one that didn't seem unusual for a small town like Maplewood. She gave him the directions he asked for, thinking little of the encounter. But there was something about his voice, something in the way he spoke, that made Sarah feel uneasy, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She didn't think much of it, though, dismissing the feeling as nothing more than an overactive imagination. After all, people asked for directions all the time, and when he insisted on thanking her in person, Sarah agreed, albeit reluctantly. It was the kind of thing that made you question your better judgment in hindsight. That decision, however small and seemingly innocent, would become the turning point. Tyler arrived at Sarah's home just after 6:30 p.m. The fading daylight made the world seem soft and calm, but the sense of serenity was quickly shattered when he appeared at the edge of her front porch. She hadn't expected him to show up in person so quickly. The stranger's friendly smile barely reached his eyes as he approached her, and there was an unease in the air that Sarah couldn't ignore. He introduced himself as Ben Miller. Another lie. But Sarah, who had grown up in this town, trusted people by default. She shook his hand and smiled, a polite gesture. But the way his hand gripped hers made her feel uneasy again, like something wasn't quite right. He lingered a little too long, his grip a little too firm, but still, she brushed off the feeling. The encounter, at first, was uneventful. He thanked her for the directions, complimented her garden, and made some small talk. Sarah felt herself growing more comfortable, still unsure why she felt this unsettling pull in her chest. She smiled again, trying to push past the tension. But before she could offer a polite goodbye, something shifted in the air. A split second of hesitation. A change in his demeanor that set off alarm bells in her mind. Tyler's expression turned cold as he took a step closer to her. Then, without warning, he lunged. In an instant, Sarah was no longer standing on her porch chatting with a stranger. She was thrown to the ground, her body slamming hard against the cold, unforgiving concrete. Her heart raced, panic spreading through her chest as Tyler pinned her down. The suddenness of the attack was overwhelming. She barely had time to react. His hands were like iron, pressing down on her throat, choking off her air as she struggled to break free. "Shut up. Don't make a sound," he ordered. His voice a low growl, his breath heavy with aggression. Sarah fought with everything she had. She clawed at his hands, trying to pry them off her throat. The world around her seemed to blur, distant sounds, the muffled beat of her own heart. Her mind raced, desperate for an escape. But Tyler was stronger, more determined. What had started as a routine interaction had devolved into a violent, brutal struggle. Somehow, Sarah managed to break free for a brief moment, gasping for air, her lungs burning. She scrambled to her feet, but Tyler was relentless. Before she could make it to the door, he reached out, grabbing her from behind and pulling her back into his grasp. This time, there was no escape. He dragged her inside her home, ignoring her screams for help. The house that had always been her sanctuary now became a prison. The familiar surroundings, the warm glow of the kitchen light, the smell of her home, felt distant and foreign in the chaos of the moment. Inside, Tyler's assault escalated. It wasn't just about the physical attack anymore. There was something far more twisted at play. Sarah could feel it. He wasn't just hurting her. He was playing with her, savoring the fear in her eyes, enjoying the power he had over her. But why? Why Sarah? What had she done to provoke this kind of violence? As Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of the madness unfolding, Tyler's actions became more erratic, more desperate. He wasn't just trying to overpower her, he was trying to break her spirit. But something in Sarah fought back. Her will to survive, her desperate hope that someone would come to her rescue. She managed to grab a kitchen knife from the counter, her hands trembling as she raised it toward him. In a moment of adrenaline-fueled panic, she swung it, but it was no use. Tyler easily overpowered her again, the knife falling from her grasp, clattering to the floor. The struggle continued for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality, it lasted mere minutes. In those minutes, Sarah Walters' life was violently and tragically cut short. Tyler had no intention of letting her go. By the time the police arrived, after an anonymous tip led them to her home, Sarah Walters was dead. Her body was found lying on the floor of her living room, a pool of blood surrounding her. The brutality of the scene left the officers shaken. What had started as a quiet evening had ended in a nightmare, a violent, senseless act that no one in Maplewood could comprehend. The murder was quick, cold, and calculated, leaving behind a trail of questions that would haunt the town for months. As the investigation began, the police turned to Sarah's phone records. They discovered the strange phone call, Tyler Harper's request for directions, and learned that it had been no accident. This wasn't a random attack. This had been planned. Tyler had known exactly where Sarah lived. But why had he targeted her? What had driven him to such a violent act? The initial clues painted a picture of a man who was cold and calculating, someone who had come to Maplewood with a purpose. But what was that purpose? What had led him to Sarah Walters? And why had he chosen to end her life so violently? At this point, the investigation revealed very little about Tyler Harper. His background was murky. No one in town recognized his name, and the few people who had interacted with him described him as quiet and unremarkable. There was no clear motive, and the police were left with more questions than answers. As they dug deeper, they discovered disturbing things about Tyler's past. His criminal history was more extensive than anyone had known. But it wasn't until they spoke with some of his former associates that they uncovered a chilling possibility. Tyler Harper wasn't in Maplewood by chance. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. He had been watching Sarah for days, planning the murder, choosing the perfect time to strike. The unsettling truth was slowly beginning to surface, but there was still much to uncover about what had truly happened that night. At this point, things don't seem to add up. The murder of Sarah Walters, a kind-hearted woman from the quiet town of Maplewood, had all the markings of a random crime of opportunity. A man, posing as someone who was lost, decided to pay her a visit. But what if it wasn't random? What if someone was pulling the strings from behind the scenes? The police had quickly uncovered that Tyler Harper, the man responsible for Sarah's brutal death, had a history, one that didn't quite fit the story of a harmless lost traveler. In fact, his criminal background was more troubling than they first realized. His sudden appearance in Maplewood, a town he had no ties to, seemed too perfect for a man with a hidden agenda. Was it just an act of violence born out of a single twisted moment, or was something deeper at play? Let's break down what we know so far. Tyler Harper wasn't just a random man who wandered into Maplewood. No, his actions suggest this was far more calculated than we first assumed. The fact that he specifically targeted Sarah, a woman who had no apparent enemies, raises some serious questions. Why Sarah? What was his real motive? Was this a crime driven by something personal? Or did he have an even darker purpose behind the murder that we haven't uncovered yet? And here's where we need your thoughts. What do you think? Was this truly a random act? Or do you believe there's more to this than meets the eye? Was Tyler Harper's initial phone call a deliberate way to gain Sarah's trust? Or was he simply looking for a way to get close to her? The fact that he insisted on meeting her in person after she provided him with directions is suspicious. Don't you think? Why not just take the directions and go on his way? There's something strange about that. Could it have been a setup from the beginning? And there's more. Remember, Sarah was a widow, living alone with her children far away. Could someone have been watching her for a long time? Someone who knew her schedule, her habits, even her vulnerability. Maybe Tyler wasn't acting alone. Maybe he had an accomplice who was feeding him information. Could this be the work of someone with a more personal connection to Sarah? Or perhaps this wasn't a crime at all, but a carefully orchestrated execution for reasons we still don't fully understand. We want to hear your theories. Do you think Tyler acted alone, or do you suspect that there could be more players involved? Did he know Sarah from somewhere before that fateful phone call? Could this have been a case of someone's obsession with Sarah, someone who had been planning her murder long before they decided to strike? Could there be another layer to the story? Something we haven't even considered yet? Hit the like button if you think this case is much more complicated than it seems, or if you have a theory that you think could explain what really happened that night. Drop a comment below. We'll be going through the comments, and we love hearing your thoughts on this case. Some potential theories we've seen popping up from viewers so far. Theory 1. The stalker was Tyler Harper, simply a predator. Could he have been stalking Sarah for a while, watching her from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? The more we learn about his history, the more this theory seems plausible. If he'd been following her, how long had he been in Maplewood? Was there more to his trip than he let on? Theory 2. The accomplice. What if Tyler wasn't alone? Could someone else have been involved in this crime, feeding Tyler information or even helping him gain access to Sarah's home? The way he knew exactly where Sarah lived, coupled with his strange insistence on meeting her, raises the possibility that this wasn't a solo effort. Theory 3. The previous connection. Could Tyler Harper have had a connection to Sarah that no one knew about? A former lover, a jealous acquaintance, or even someone from her past? There's a chance that Tyler's appearance in Maplewood wasn't as random as it seems. If there's a deeper relationship we're missing, that would explain why he singled her out. Theory 4. The crime of opportunity. Maybe Tyler was just a desperate man in need of money, and Sarah was in the wrong place at the wrong time. This theory suggests that his phone call and visit were spontaneous acts driven by a chance encounter. He saw an opportunity and took it. But if that's the case, why did it escalate so quickly? Why didn't he just leave after the phone call? Now, let's take a step back for a moment. We've been focusing on the killer Tyler Harper, but let's think about Sarah's actions in those final moments. What did she know, and when did she know it? Was there any chance she could have escaped? Could there have been a sign, a clue, a warning that we missed? Sarah Walters wasn't just any victim. She was someone who was deeply connected to her community. A woman who had lived a life of routine. This attack wasn't just a crime against her. It was an attack against everything the town of Maplewood stood for. What happens when your sense of safety is shattered in such a violent way? And here's the big question. What will happen to Maplewood after this? The town has been left in shock, wondering if there are more secrets hidden beneath the surface. We know that when a crime like this happens, it leaves behind a ripple effect that touches everyone, neighbors, friends, and even strangers. We want to know your thoughts, so go ahead and drop a comment below. What do you think really happened that night? Was Tyler Harper just a violent stranger, or is there more to the story? Do you believe there could be more to this crime than we've uncovered so far? What are your theories on who might be involved, and what could have been the motive? We'll be reading through all your comments, and we'll be back with an update as more pieces of the puzzle fall into place. And don't forget to hit that like button if you think this case deserves more attention. Just when it seemed like the case might go cold, a break in the investigation came from the most unexpected source, the killer's own mistake. It was a mistake so simple yet so crucial that it would turn the entire investigation on its head, and it would reveal that the man responsible for Sarah Walters' murder, Tyler Harper, wasn't quite the stranger everyone had thought. Up until this point, the authorities had been focusing on Tyler Harper as an isolated, unpredictable criminal. They believed that his sudden appearance in Maplewood, coupled with his violent attack on Sarah, was the product of an opportunistic stranger looking for an easy target. Investigators had even looked into his criminal history, but they couldn't find a direct connection to Sarah. Theories about a random crime were beginning to take hold, and there was concern that the case might eventually grow cold. But then an overlooked detail in Tyler's past would surface, and it would change everything. It began with a piece of evidence that had been sitting in the case files all along, a piece that hadn't been fully examined until now. A missing persons report. Tyler Harper's name had come up in an old investigation from years earlier, one that hadn't seemed relevant to the murder case at first, but now it would take on a whole new light. The missing person was a woman named Emily Cartwright. She had gone missing 5 years before Sarah Walters was murdered, and at the time her disappearance had baffled local authorities. Emily was a mother of 2 who had lived in a neighboring town. She had no history of running away, no signs of trouble at home. Her case had gone cold, the trail disappearing after a few weeks of investigation. No one had ever found her body. But Tyler Harper's name kept cropping up in interviews with people who knew Emily, though he had never been considered a suspect. Upon reviewing the case once again, detectives realized a striking connection between Tyler Harper and Emily Cartwright. It wasn't just that he had known her. It was that Emily had been a close friend of Sarah Walters many years ago. They had gone to school together, and they had stayed in touch through the years, though their friendship had waned over time. But what caught the investigators' attention was this: Tyler Harper had been living in the same town as Emily when she disappeared. He was one of the last people known to have seen her. And more than that, he had been in the area around the time Sarah had lost touch with her friend. The connection was undeniable. Tyler Harper hadn't just been a random stranger to Maplewood. He had known Sarah, he had known Emily, and his connection to both women was not as innocent as he had led everyone to believe. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was personal. At this point, investigators began to question the true motive behind Sarah's murder. Why had Tyler Harper killed her? What had she known? And how was Emily Cartwright involved? The answer to these questions came when a breakthrough discovery was made in the police interrogation room. It was a slip-up. A small, almost imperceptible mistake that would unravel the entire facade Tyler Harper had created. During his interrogation, Tyler was shown a series of photos of the crime scene. As the detectives pressed him for more details, they noticed something strange. He became visibly nervous when they presented a photograph of Emily Cartwright from the missing persons report. For a brief moment, his eyes flickered with recognition. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse that exposed his true connection to both Sarah and Emily. In that moment, the detectives knew they had him. Tyler Harper wasn't just the stranger he had claimed to be. He was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The murder of Sarah Walters was not just an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a much darker, long-running obsession. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a shocking truth. Tyler Harper had been stalking both Sarah and Emily for years. His obsession with Emily had started long before her disappearance. He had developed an unhealthy fixation on her, one that grew over time. When Emily had vanished, Tyler's obsession had only deepened. He was unable to let go of the woman he believed he had loved. But when he found out that Emily had been close friends with Sarah, it was as if the two women became intertwined in his twisted mind. Sarah's resemblance to Emily had fueled his delusions. Tyler's motive was not just murder, it was revenge. The death of Sarah Walters was an act of closure for him. He believed that by killing her he could somehow bring an end to his torment over Emily's disappearance. It was a twisted form of justice. In his mind, Tyler Harper had been living with the belief that if he could eliminate Sarah, he could finally have Emily, by erasing the one connection left between him and her. In his warped reality, this murder was an attempt to take control over a past he couldn't let go of. The investigation into Emily Cartwright's disappearance took a new turn as well. With Tyler Harper finally in custody, it was revealed that Emily had not run away, as her family had initially feared. Instead, she had been murdered, and her body had been hidden. The long-lost answers about Emily's fate had finally been uncovered, but they came at a devastating cost. The news sent shockwaves through Maplewood. The once quiet town, where nothing ever seemed to happen, was now forever marked by the horrific actions of a man who had been hiding in plain sight. The residents of the town, who had initially believed this was a senseless killing by a stranger, now realized they had been living alongside a predator, someone who had been stalking their own neighbors for years. The arrest of Tyler Harper brought an end to the immediate search for Sarah Walters' killer. But while the truth had been uncovered, the questions surrounding the crime only multiplied. As the case drew to a close, the community of Maplewood struggled to comprehend how a quiet, ordinary town could be the backdrop to such a gruesome act. Tyler Harper's trial would become a spectacle, one that left many of Sarah's friends, family, and neighbors grappling with the aftermath of his actions. The trial began several months after his arrest. Tyler's defense team argued that he had acted out of an overwhelming psychological condition, an obsession that had grown uncontrollable over the years. But the prosecution painted a different picture, one of a calculated, cold-blooded killer who had murdered Sarah Walters not out of a momentary impulse, but as part of a twisted, long-running obsession with a woman he couldn't let go of. They presented evidence that Tyler had meticulously planned Sarah's murder, knowing exactly where she lived, tracking her movements, and eventually luring her into a false sense of security with that initial phone call. They also tied his fixation on Sarah to the disappearance of Emily Cartwright, revealing how he had used his twisted need for revenge to justify the murder. Despite the defense's claims of mental illness, the jury found Tyler Harper guilty of first-degree murder. His sentencing, however, would raise even more difficult questions. The court acknowledged the severity of his actions, but there was no denying that Tyler had been living with a deep psychological wound, a wound that no amount of therapy or rehabilitation could ever heal. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But as the gavel came down, bringing the trial to a close, the impact of Sarah's death on her family and community lingered. Sarah Walters had been a beloved figure in Maplewood. She had no enemies, no history of conflict. She had simply been a kind, ordinary woman who lived a quiet life. But her loss shattered the sense of safety and community that had once defined the town. Friends and neighbors were left questioning how someone like Sarah, someone so well known and so well loved, could have become a target for a man like Tyler Harper. And even though justice had been served, there was a lingering sense that the true nature of his crime would never be fully understood. For Sarah's family, the trial was both a sense of closure and a new beginning. Her children, who had been living out of state at the time of her death, returned to Maplewood to mourn the loss of their mother. They had grown up in a town that felt safe, where they could always count on their mother to provide comfort and stability. Now, that sense of security had been shattered, and they were left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been taken too soon. Sarah's funeral was a somber occasion, one that brought the entire town together to honor her life. People who had known her, neighbors, colleagues, friends, gathered to say their final goodbyes. The loss was profound. The memories of Sarah's warmth, kindness, and generosity could never be replaced, and in her absence there was a void that could never be filled. Yet, even as her family and friends laid her to rest, there were questions left unanswered. Why had Tyler Harper been so obsessed with Sarah? What had he seen in her that drove him to such violence? Was it purely because of his twisted fixation on Emily, or had something else been at play? There was a part of the community that wondered if there had been some sort of hidden connection that they would never fully understand. Some theorized that Tyler had been living in Maplewood longer than anyone had realized. Had he been stalking Sarah before that fateful phone call, lurking in the shadows for months or even years? The police, too, were left with lingering doubts. Despite the closure of the case, there were still unanswered questions about Emily Cartwright's disappearance. While Tyler Harper had confessed to her murder, her body had never been found. Some members of the community believed that her remains were still hidden somewhere close to Maplewood, waiting to be uncovered. As we come to the end of this chilling story, the questions still linger. While justice has been served, the dark complexities of this case remain far from fully understood. Tyler Harper may have been convicted for the brutal murder of Sarah Walters, but was it truly the end of the story, or are there more hidden truths we haven't yet uncovered? Now that we've explored the haunting details of this case, I want to hear from you. What's your theory on the true motive behind Sarah Walters' death? Was Tyler Harper just a random predator? Or was he hiding something deeper, something more personal? Was there more to his connection with Emily Cartwright than we've been told? And what about the eerie way he seemed to know exactly where Sarah lived and how to gain her trust? Could there have been more players involved in this horrific crime? Drop a comment below. Tell me your theories, your questions, and any chilling details you've picked up on that might have slipped past the investigators. Remember, no theory is too wild, and no detail is too small. We love hearing from you and discussing the twists and turns of these dark and disturbing true crime cases. And don't forget to hit that like button if you believe there's still much more to be uncovered in this case, because there's so much more to explore. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on future true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. We've got even more shocking cases coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. And hey, if you're interested in another case that dives into the psychological depth of crime and the twisted minds behind these tragedies, click on the link right here to watch our next video, where we explore another unsolved mystery that's bound to leave you questioning everything. We want to hear your voice. Your input matters, and by commenting and sharing your thoughts, you help us build a stronger community of true crime enthusiasts. And remember, the story isn't over until we've explored every detail, so we'll keep digging to uncover the truth. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay curious, stay safe, and keep asking the tough questions. The truth behind Sarah Walters' murder was more twisted than anyone could have imagined, and it left the entire town of Maplewood in disbelief. At first, what seemed like a random, brutal act of violence revealed itself to be the culmination of years of obsession and a deep psychological wound, one that Sarah, her family, and even the community had never seen coming. Tyler Harper, a man who had seemed like just another stranger in town, was ultimately revealed to be the twisted figure behind her death, a man whose fixation on a woman from his past had turned into an unrelenting need for revenge. As the town tries to heal from the horrific events, the question still lingers: how could this happen in a place like Maplewood, where everyone knew each other, where doors were often left unlocked, and where nothing bad ever seemed to happen? The murder of Sarah Walters shook the very foundation of this once peaceful town. But the horror didn't end with the crime itself. The dark secrets Tyler Harper carried with him, and the twisted motivations that drove him, serve as a haunting reminder of how little we truly know about the people around us. This case serves as a chilling lesson. Sometimes the lies we're told, whether they come from strangers or those closest to us, can be deadly. Tyler Harper's lies, his manipulation, and his obsession with Sarah and Emily Cartwright turned into a deadly game, and the consequences of those lies were felt by everyone in the community. While justice has been served with Harper's conviction and sentence, there's still a feeling of unsettled mystery. The disappearance of Emily Cartwright, the twisted connection between her and Sarah, and the lingering questions about Tyler's past all cast long shadows over this case. For Sarah's family, her friends, and the town of Maplewood, there may never be full closure. As we wrap up this tragic story, it's important to remember Sarah Walters for who she truly was: a kind woman with a heart full of love for her family, her friends, and her community. Her life was stolen far too soon by a man who never had any business in her world. But even as we mourn her loss, we also remember her legacy. Sarah's memory lives on, not only through the stories of those who loved her, but in the lessons this case taught us about trust, vulnerability, and the danger of hidden obsessions.